it's a privilege to be asked to present to our people here everything that we've been doing in the last few years. So some key points. The presentation that I'm doing just now is made on behalf of the whole editing team that have been working in the ISO committee for Working Group 3. That's a very big team. We have at least 6 documents, 7 if you count a technical report that we're producing. And we have people from all around the world, from every continent, except for Antarctica. In the role of editor, we don't represent our sponsor organisations, and we don't represent our national bodies. And we've heard a lot of discussion about the different governments, how we're using those, and in the history of common criteria under the CCDB, I believe that national interests were of great importance. So that's a key difference. ISO, in its development, has been able to make sure that all the different kinds of sponsors are represented. So whether that's developers, consultants, labs, and so on. This is an important difference. Thanks are due to everybody who has contributed during our revision. It's not just the editing team, of course. We have experts, and I cannot speak highly enough of the expertise that we do have in the group. It's been very well supported. And of course, the thanks are due to all the editors. There is a huge amount of effort gone into this, of the behind the scenes work, editing standards, with all the problems that go with tools. It's worth many, many hours. So thanks to everybody. I'm going to briefly cover, because we don't have too much time, what the standards are, a brief history of the standards, confidence in evaluations, confidence in the standards, the key thing, what is new in our new edition, and since we just came out of the working group meeting, chaired by Miguel, yesterday we finished, I managed to get the slides updated to show our very recent progress. Okay, so it is the birthday of SC27, and if it's the 30th anniversary, then that must be 1990. My original slides did the math poorly, and we had pictures from 1980, but here is the sort of technology we were working with in 1990, just as a reminder to those who are old enough to remember those days. We did have devices, if you like, products in most of the categories that we're working today, but of course over 30 years things have changed. So yeah, we had networking devices, mainly Ethernet and token ring. We had computers, yes, we had the mainframes, and I don't have a picture of that, and the mid-range frames. But the new kids on the block were personal computers, and we were beginning to understand how important personal computing would be. The protocols that we use were just starting to develop. We had TCP/IP, and I think in 1990 or very shortly after, we discovered HTTP was a very useful thing, and we could have the World Wide Web. Yes, we had some crypto. In those days, we were working with DES and RSA, and I believe, if my research is correct, we even had some PGP. For those of us working and using devices in real life, we were starting to see mobile phones. We were starting to work on our leisure time with gaming, and we even had some multimedia things. In those days, external media, there was no cloud, or at least not in the sense we have it today. And we were using things like zip drives and CDs and even floppy disks. Although I think those ones were actually a little bit hard. Smart cards were very early. I think there was, in France, the effort to develop smart cards. And we had some, what in today's space looks like very chunky operating system GUIs, the start of the GUIs, and some applications that we started to find were a little bit useful. And in the background, we had technology developing, so we even managed to get the Hubble telescope launched, although I don't think that SC27 was deeply involved with that. Okay. What were we doing with criteria in those days? Well, we had lots of different national criteria, and I've managed to collect a few pictures. It's hard to find pictures of the criteria from 30 years ago or more, so it's not a full representation. But here is the kind of documents we were working with. Of course, probably not too much in electronic form. We had paper copies. So, a brief history. We had, as I mentioned, different national criteria, at least since the 1980s and into the 1990s. And somebody somewhere had a great idea. Why don't we bring them all together? I believe, and people can correct me later, but I believe each criteria had different strengths. Some of them were more process focused, some of them had some very good technical input, all sorts of things. It was a developing standard and a developing technology, if you like, for evaluating systems and products to think about security. And with that, the birth of the common criteria came around. There was an organisation put together to help bring these standards together. And it's no accident that it was called common criteria, because it was common for all the countries signing that CCRA, the recognition arrangement, where they were able to come to a common understanding. When I talk to people who were there at the time, that was not an easy task. And SC27 ISO was involved at that early stage. One idea was that ISO would publish these common criteria, and at least we took the work done by the CCDB, by the Common Criteria Development Board, and we were allowed to publish it in ISO, which gave us a very wide audience and some status. So you can see that over the years we have had several major versions, revisions of common criteria. ISO has always kept up. And finally we had a version 4 proposed, and that didn't get used in the wild. And this is because there were other things going on in the background. And in order to open up to a much wider range of stakeholders, I believe the decision was made to put the development into ISO. And so ISO began leading the charge, if you like, in the development of the 4th edition. Excuse me. So, go on, next. A little bit about what are these standards exactly. We've always had, and will always have, she said, prove me wrong, that we need to explain how this framework works, what are the common criteria and how do they work, how can we make product type specifications of, for those of you that know common criteria, a protection profile that is particular to a product type, so something like network devices or mobile devices that we've heard so much about before. And then the other construct, one of the other constructs is the ability to take that product type and then specify in a document called a security target, something that's very specific to the actual product being evaluated. We have catalogues of security requirements that are common. So we have the functional security requirements that are given in Part 2, and the assurance security requirements that are given in Part 3. And then finally, we need to know how do we actually evaluate or test these things. We now have the specification in the security target that's drawing from the catalogues of common criteria, security requirements. So we also have the methodology, which in the CCRA parlance is called the CEM, the Common Evaluation Methodology, and in ISO has the much more intuitive name as ISO 18045. And recently we've come to understand that although we have the basic methodology, that we do need specific methodologies for evaluating particular kinds of technology. So here's our little ecosystem. Hopefully it's all in balance and we haven't unbalanced our ecosystem with this change. And nothing has really changed in the way that we use these standards. ISO 15408 and 18045 or even the common criteria are there at the core. It's a language, it's the fundamental agreement on how we do evaluations. But if we move out to the green area, and this is outside, pretty much outside the work done in ISO, we need the industry and the stakeholders to decide what product types we have and to develop the protection profiles, which are the specification and agreement for particular product types, and even for particular products once we have those protection profiles in place. The white zone is where we can help in ISO with some of the things. So we have supporting standards, things for making sure that we have commonality between all the different schemes that are using and specifying the common criteria, between all the different labs, and I'm sure many of us are familiar with the auditing and making sure that we're complying with those two standards. More recently, we have some supporting standards about competence levels to try and make sure that everybody's at the same level of competence, or at least a minimum level of competence, so we can establish some trust in each other. On the national scheme front, or even commercial schemes nowadays, so these are the bodies that are using the common criteria and the work that's been done for the different agreements on product types, and overseeing the evaluations, making sure we all do it right. They have their own policies. They have sometimes specified specific evaluation methodologies that can be used in support of evaluation. And then finally, on the outer ring, in the red zone, we have the different recognition arrangements, recognition agreements that are used to establish confidence on a much wider scale than a simple national level or scheme industry level. So here I will try and emphasize that by themselves, the common criteria standards, the ISO 15408 and 18045, don't do anything. They're catalogues, there's a framework, it's a very nice thing, but you have to use them in context with industry and with the national bodies and governments in order to make it happen and make it work. And for that we need confidence. And there's a great many examples of national schemes. Of course, we've seen the CCRA bring on board, I think, 31 nations is the count today. We've seen SOGIS develop in Europe. We see many more schemes coming up. Of course, more recently, with the changing policies and so on, and the changing world, we've seen more commercial schemes popping up, and in my opinion, that's a very good thing. So, okay. So yes, we've heard from the other speakers. We have the CCRA. That changed about 5 years ago. It now causes or can allow recognition between 31 countries, nations, at a basic level of assurance. We have, as we heard, the new happening now EU Common Criteria Scheme coming under the direction of ENISA. That's expected to replace SOGIS, which has been established for many years. Within the EU, SOGIS has allowed the European nations to have confidence in evaluations performed with each other at a medium and in some cases high assurance and a lot of confidence. And it's almost impossible to find out how many bilateral or regional MRAs are established that we don't even know about. So there's some of these all around the world. So Asia, we know have arrangements, and I think this is part of the future. Okay. So here is what's new in our major revision of the 4th edition of the ISO standards and the evolution of the common criteria standards. I don't know if you can see that, it's a bit small on my screen. So what we did, we convened in ISO's Working Group 3. We took input from a wide variety of stakeholders, and because we hadn't revised common criteria for quite some time, we wanted to look forward, we wanted to reflect the developments that have been going on in the various nations and industries and zones and so on. So we asked for all that input. This is a minor one, but we have consolidated all the terms and definitions. They were spread out before, and as practicing people, that could be a bit confusing. So hopefully you will find when we get this thing published that there'll be one dictionary. and thanks to Ella especially for guiding us through that. One of the problems we had was that over the years, different countries, different areas had developed at least two different approaches to how we do security evaluation assurance. Nothing wrong with that. One is a specification based. We found that we had two approaches to giving assurance to security evaluation. One was what we came to call the specification-based approach, and that is particularly used in some nations. I'm going to call a few of them out, but it's more than just one or two. So Australia, New Zealand are using these approaches. The US are particularly strong on that approach. And there's another that we came to call the attack-based approach, which was the traditional approach, and that tends to be used in Europe and other places. So somehow we had to find a way to allow our common criteria to address both of those approaches. And again, that was one of those things that wasn't very easy, but we did it. We added some of the things that people all around the world knew that we wanted to do that was not well explained in the existing standards. So modularity and composition techniques. We know that people like to evaluate different parts of a product and somehow compose these into the final thing that you go out and buy or acquire. So that's good. We have enhanced a notion about packages, which is just convenient groupings of security requirements that we can easily reuse. It's a way of not reinventing the wheel all the time. We have updated the security policy definition, and that we've also spent some time improving in the higher levels of assurance the security policy module and in other places to capture what we've learned over the decades about evaluations at this high level. So in a summary, we have significantly revised our general model in part one. We have some new and changed security functional requirements in our part two catalogue. It's not a huge change. For the existing ones, we've checked the re-leveling of those, and we brought in some new ones that were commonly used as what we have found in industry that we needed and that were frequently specified as what we call extended security functional requirements, meaning basically that they weren't in our catalogue. Well, now at least some of them are. And because we have some history, and because we revised the general model, then we have updated many of the security assurance requirements. And of course, the SEM, or 18045, is very closely aligned with this part 3, so that too has been updated. We introduced a new part 4. This is where we can build on what used to be, what still is, in the SEM as the base methodology, but it allows us to specify specific evaluation methodologies for particular product types or even particular technologies. This will allow us, especially when it's associated with a product type, so for PPs, to make sure that we have commonality in evaluations, all using that PP, that we know all the labs use the same methodologies around the world. This is a good thing. So that is why we have that new part 4, and it should help very much with our trust in each other. We took predefined packages, which used to live in part 3. So the one most people are familiar with are the evaluation assurance levels, EALs, and we put those in another part, in part 5. It's basically been a cut and paste. We haven't really changed the EALs at all. And there are some other predefined packages. Why did we do that? Well, because part 3 was so big that it made all of our tools crash, is one good reason. And it also allows us to facilitate those schemes that like to use the specification approach, which relies on EALs most of the time, without somehow having it mandated for the other approach. The attack-based approach uses EALs. The specification-based approach and exact conformance does not. We've also been producing as we go along, and thanks to the colleagues on the editing team, we do plan to introduce at the same time as the standards get published a technical report. This should give us more detailed clues about what changed and guidance about those changes, as all the different schemes have to develop their transition policies for the future. And finally, what did we do last week? What's the very recent progress? So thanks again to everybody in Working Group 3